I am Spencer Turkin. I live just down the road in Greensboro, North Carolina. I am the play-by-play voice for North Carolina A&T, which is the largest HBCU in the country, and we are located on the east side of Greensboro. And this is a really awesome panel. This is going to be the Women in Sports Media panel, and we have two lovely guests with us. Jeannine Edwards, who is going to talk about her story and her journey to ESPN, as well as Sarah Todd, who is the 2022 Utah Sportswriter of the Year and covers the Utah Jazz. I will go ahead and let both of our esteemed panelists give an opening statement, talk a little bit about themselves, their journey to where they are, and their ride through sports media, and then we'll go ahead and we'll ask some questions. We'll take some from the audience as well, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Spencer.
Let's see. Should be good now.
You would think I'd
There
know
we
how
go.
to use one of these things.
Just a few years
I'm a
on the
little
sidelines,
rusty.
right?
I'm a little rusty. I wasn't sure about the demographic here in terms of the audience. So if I step back in time a little too much, I apologize, but it'll kind of be like a nice little walk down memory lane. Especially for the females in the group. It's hard to believe, it's hard to imagine that there was a time a few decades ago when women on sports telecasts were basically there as adornments. It's hard to see that now, despite their talent. The sports world was male-dominated, and the media coverage was as well. Now I'm talking, 60s, 70s, so we're going back a way, before most of your time anyway. But it was one giant man cave. Thanks to female pioneers in sports coverage like Phyllis George, Leslie Visser, Jane Kennedy, the sideline and studio realms were forever altered, and the way for people like Sarah and me was sort of paved by their hard work. It was hard to be taken seriously or respected when you were basically there as a sidebar years ago. So fortunately, by the time I hit the airwaves in the mid to late 90s, so we are still going back in time, female sports anchors and reporters had more than proven their skill and worth, and the bar had been raised. Thank you, Phyllis, Leslie, Jane, among others. Now women are some of the hardest workers, keenest observers, savviest storytellers, and most respected figures in media, not just sports media. I was fortunate enough and flattered to be named one of the 40 women who raised the bar in sports media in 2012 by the LA Daily News. It really was quite an honor, and I was blessed to have kind of reached the pinnacle of sports coverage by 2018 when I was co-hosting shows like First Take and NFL Live, and I was a senior correspondent for SportsCenter, covering everything from NFL to college football and Major League Baseball, among other things, and sitting down with some of the biggest names. But it's astounding to me looking back because I feel so blessed. My story is very different, though, from how most people end up in the sports world. As a young girl, I wanted to be a jockey. I loved horses, I loved racing, and that's all I was focused on. That was what I wanted to do. And I did make it happen. I spent about 10 years riding and training racehorses, but I was never a famous jockey. I found that being a female trainer was very difficult financially, and so a hard decision had to be made, and I found myself, at 30 saying, well, now what do I do? I had no college degree. I had no training. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no skills. I had never even thought about being in the media. So eventually, I got lucky. I started doing some on-air analyst work at the racetracks in Maryland. So I knew the sport. I just didn't really know anything about being on the air. Well, they were very patient with me. And the one thing that I would stress, and I know Sarah can speak to this, is having excellent organizational and writing skills. That was the thing that saved me. So a few years later, when ESPN was starting a new live telecast, I brazenly submitted a tape. I had more guts than brains at that point. Miraculously, I was called to come in and audition. I got the job. I had to commute to Tulsa, which I didn't mind, from Maryland, but it would be a precursor to 22 years of commuting all over the country, covering sports for ESPN. I've been to 47 of the 50 states. So I guess the moral of the story is detour signs can be your friend. Don't be afraid of roadblocks. Sometimes the unexpected fork in the road can lead to the pot of gold. And that's been my journey. And I'll let Sarah tell her story, and then I can maybe get into some tidbits that I learned along the way.
Perfect.
I mean, Jeannine is thanking people for paving the way, and I have to thank Jeannine for being one of the people to pave the way, obviously. Yeah, I think a lot of people in sports media, I mean, especially women, will be able to tell you that their path is not normal. I don't think a lot of people's path is normal, and so the fact that we have, you know, conferences and conventions and things like this to talk to young people or to give people an idea of all of the different paths is really helpful, because I graduated with a degree in comparative literature and was like traveling Europe, not really knowing what I wanted to do, and it turns out like a degree in literature does not do much for you. So it was like, oh, you know how to read books, good job. And so, but I was like the kind of person that would like put up playoff brackets on my wall in my bedroom and cover and like follow basketball to the point where I was just able to recite stats of different guys on the floor. Or like I would know draft prospects better than the people that were covering it that I was watching, just because I like to get so nerdy and in depth about basketball. And so
That's a good quality.
yeah. And so after graduating, I was like, well, I don't really know what to do. I ended up moving back in with my parents, and I'm in my mid-late 20s and don't really know what I'm going to do with my life. And I'm not even the one that thought about becoming a sports reporter. It was everyone in my family that kind of was like, well, you like to write and you love basketball. Why don't you try to monetize that somehow? And I was like, wow, that's a really good idea, everyone else except for me. So, and that's what I did. I went back to school. I went to J school and very quickly realized, like, okay, I'm a lot older than everyone here now because I'd already been through the whole college scene. And so I just annoyed people until they gave me opportunities. I would show up at people's offices. I would show up at people's functions and just knock on doors and say hello until I wore them down. And I think that that's a quality that I think that a lot of journalists really need to have, is just the ability to wait someone else out, whether it's in a hallway or a locker room or just at an office door. And so eventually I started covering the Golden State Warriors. I was in J school in the Bay Area, and I was covering them for a really, really tiny outlet, making like $40 an article, which is not helpful in the Bay Area because it's so expensive. And taking a full-time load of classes. And then when I graduated, I covered the Warriors for one more year and moved to Philadelphia. I was at the Philadelphia Inquirer for almost 5 years. I was on the sports desk there for the first 2, and then covered the Sixers. And then I moved to Utah, and I cover the Jazz now. And so I'm going into my 11th season covering the NBA, and it's been pretty good.
That's awesome.
Jeannine, you mentioned something, and Sarah, I would say that with your degree in literature, it inherently came to you, is mastering the English language and actually knowing how to write.
I
And
don't know that.
more so than a lot of folks, though.
Maybe we can fake it really well.
Right, fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
But the importance of having that background and knowing how to actually use language to convey thoughts, both written and spoken, how important is it to have that strong base if you're going to go into sports media?
Yeah, I mean, not so much literature. I don't think that anybody else needs to like go research like 18th century British poetry in order to do this. But I think that the more that you read, the better you're going to write. And so I am constantly reading not only all of my competitors, but I'm reading like memoirs and books and everything that you can get your hands on, just to consume as much language as you can, because like eventually no one is 100% original. And so we're all going to steal from everyone. And the only way that you can kind of have like a wide breadth of what you're going to steal from is if you continue to consume.
I love that. And I think for me, I just had really strong English and writing skills all throughout school, no college degree. So I really was an open book as far as what I could maybe accomplish, but I was so fixated on horse racing that I couldn't think of anything else. But Sarah, you hit on something that I couldn't agree more with, just being assertive and being determined. And I have found that that has helped me over the years. You gain confidence the more reps you get. But at first, when I started working for ESPN and I had to walk into an NBA locker room or an NFL locker room, and I had never done that before, I'm a shy person anyway. Like walking into this room, I feel shy. But you got to snap yourself out of it. You have to. So the more reps you get, the more confident you become, and you have to be a bulldog. You have to be a bulldog. You have to put your fears or your shyness aside. I would say the things that really have helped me over the years is having an insatiable curiosity, realizing that there are no stupid questions, having an eye for details and minutia that other people might miss, especially if you're an on-air reporter or even if you're writing, just to be able to convey that to the audience or the readers. And the outgoing personality that Sarah mentioned, it's just knowing how to be assertive but yet respectful and appropriate. Appropriateness to me is one of the keys because it can take years to build a reputation. It can take minutes to destroy it.
Yeah, I think, and then the appropriateness also especially for women in sports, because often the sports that we cover are male sports. It's very difficult to know. I don't think that it's difficult to know when you're being appropriate, but it's very difficult to know when the other person thinks that you're being appropriate. And so, and the simplest thing, like asking a source for a phone number, like I've been doing it 10 years, and there are still moments where I'm like, I don't know, if I ask right now, are they going to think I'm asking for their phone number, or are they going to think I'm asking for their phone number?
And a male never has that problem.
Never, absolutely not a chance. I've watched my male colleagues, and they'll go up to anyone at any point. Somebody's in a towel, and they're just like, oh yeah, let me get your phone number, and I'm like, oh gosh, wouldn't it be nice?
Yeah, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Jeannine, your career path, it's so funny because you started with all the horse racing, and then you became a general assignment reporter. You worked college football, college basketball. It's almost as if you paved the way for Marty Smith, who went from racing to this massive personality on ESPN. So you did it first, and what was that like for you? You had all that background in horse racing. You were very comfortable in that realm. What was it like for you when you had to step outside of your comfort zone and now start covering other sports?
That's so funny you say Marty Smith, because he and I have worked together, not together on the same location, but on the same air, doing the same thing. And you fight really hard to not be pigeonholed into just one thing. And I did fight that for years, where I was the horse racing girl. I was the one who knew horses, who knew racing. Thankfully, ESPN gave me enough live on-air reps and put me on enough big events like the Kentucky Derby, the Triple Crown, to where I was able to build the credibility, which then allowed me to transfer reporting skills to other sports. And there was some pushback, there was some hesitation, but I think as Marty has shown so adeptly, it can be done. And if you are good with the English language, a good observer, a good writer, and can convey that to the audience, that's really what a reporter is. It doesn't matter the subject.
I will say your story made me chuckle because you said that you were a trainer and that money was tight, this and that, and then you decided to go into in-house television. Yeah. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a big step up in paycheck right there and whatnot. But what was it like trying to make it? And this is for both of you now. You spoke about trying to make it while you were in school and working in the Bay Area, where I think $40 might get you an egg sunny side up if you're lucky. So what was it like to have to invest in yourself and to have to persevere in order to get to where you are now, where even at some media outlets, you're still not making enough?
Yeah, I certainly did not get into journalism for the money. And I don't think that, if anybody is thinking, oh, I might be thinking about going into a different career path and you're kind of waffling, then choose the one that makes more money, because this is not the one that's gonna boom someday and just become a moneymaker. I think, I'm still not making great money. The perks of my job are that I get paid to watch basketball, but like it's not the best money in the world. I miss things on weekends and holidays, and I'm working 7 days a week for many months on end, and you miss a lot, but then the perk of it is that like I get paid to watch what I think is the most beautiful thing in the world. And so there's always going to be trade-off. What was the question? What am I even talking about?
No, I mean you're hitting on it, and that's just like how do you persevere through all of the things that are stacked against you? And it is not easy to keep going when money is tight, when people are saying, why are you doing this to yourself? Why are you working 7 days a week for 6 months on end, and then maybe taking a week off before the draft and then coming right back to it?
Yeah, I also didn't come from money. I had very, very meager beginnings. I didn't have family to like help me pay for college or anything, and so I'm a first generation college graduate. And even then, like that wasn't even that important to my family, who lives in a very small mountain town. Like they don't care about that stuff. When I said that I wanted to be a sports reporter, and I had other family members and friends who had suggested it, my parents were like, I don't think this is a good idea. Like number one, that doesn't sound like you can make a lot of money. And number two, that sounds like a man's world. And so I didn't have like all of the support that would make for a very heartwarming story, but you have to have it in yourself, especially in this industry, because it's incredibly cutthroat, and like no one is going to like openly walk out and like hand you an invitation to help you. Sometimes you have to like ask for help.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's also important to surround yourself with people who will support you, because it is a very, very demanding lifestyle. You mentioned it, Spencer, like you're working every weekend, you're working holidays, there's very little downtime. When I was on the sideline crew for college football, we would literally work 7 days a week for the entire college football season. We would start on Monday for the next week's game and work, conference calls, studying Tuesday, Wednesday, travel Thursday, meetings Friday, game Saturday, travel back Sunday. And it was just a grind. You have to have people around you that understand that. But we are getting paid to do something that I wouldn't even really consider a real job. I mean, we all love sports. We're blessed, we're fortunate to be able to do that, but there is a significant trade-off with your lifestyle and family.
The holidays, you mentioned the weekends. I mean, just personal experience. I haven't had Thanksgiving with my family in 11 years because I work in college basketball, and that's MTE time. And then there's a football game that weekend. And so you're not going to be home for those things. Do you find it difficult, and this is a double standard in some places, as a female, being like, I'm not going to be home for the holiday and with your family and whatnot? Do you feel like that's a more difficult conversation? And this is just the reality of it, not right or wrong. It's probably really wrong, but do you find it more difficult? It's one of those other things that's an uphill battle to have to fight.
I mean, I don't have kids, and so it's very easy. Yeah. And I think that for those things, it's very helpful to just have the rest of your family just make sure that they understand the situation. So I haven't been with my family for Christmas in 10 years. And so the time that I'm able to go out and visit them around Christmas is usually like, okay, so the team that I'm covering is playing the Sacramento Kings, and they have a day off afterwards, and it's in January, Christmas in January this year. And so you just have to, and so we put up a tree in January, and we open gifts, and there are people that are sad that they have to wait another month for their presents, but that's when I can be there. And so you change life to make it fit.
It also helps when you're married to a football coach and he's gone more than you are, so he understands.
So women's sports have now, they're starting to skyrocket, and the attention is starting to finally get to the point where ratings are coming in for women's sports. Networks are providing actual really good time slots to put those things on. As a woman in sport, do you feel like that is helpful to you as you're in the locker room now that there's more respect towards women in sports in general?
That's a hard one. I didn't cover much women's sports. That's the problem. I think with if I was young today, or if I was in college today, it would really make me happy that that's the situation, because I didn't fall in love with women's sports because there was no coverage of women's sports. So that's why I started loving the NBA, because, I mean, when I was growing up, there was no WNBA coverage, hardly any women's basketball coverage at all. And so, and then the other side of that is that now that there is a rise in coverage of women's sports, which I'm never going to knock, it is strange to be a woman in the industry because people just expect us to know a lot about women's sports. Mm-hmm. And so people will be like, oh, or have you thought about like covering the WNBA? And I'm like, I don't even know the rules in the WNBA. I don't know almost any of the players. I just have no knowledge base. And so there's an assumption that because we're women, we know a lot about women's sports. But at the same time, like I said, growing up, I wish that I had the access that there is now.
There's only so many hours in the day for research, and when you're working 7 days a week for college football or basketball, it's hard to pay attention. But however, I will say, in my opinion, the Women's College World Series is almost more exciting than the men's, except for maybe this year. Go Deeks.
You mention it, assumptions. That's a huge word, and especially being a female in sports. What is it like to have to consistently break people's assumptions at every turn?
I think, as I stated in my open, I think that was probably a lot more challenging back in the day for people like Phyllis and Jane and Gail Gardner and those gals. By the time I came along, and hopefully now for you, there is a built-in credibility, I think, by the time you get to a certain level. I think the important things to remember, especially for women, and it's a shame that it has to be different for men or women, but I think that females especially have to remember you're not part of the story when you're sent to cover something. You're there to cover the story. So it's not about you, your hair, your wardrobe, your friends, what you did last night, your social media. You're a journalist, not an influencer. And there's a big difference, and I think these days there can be some sort of gray area between the two. And that's not to say that somebody on social media cannot become a journalist, but I think it's two very distinct things, and it's a different mindset. So your opinions don't matter. Leave your biases at home. Leave your personal life at home. Above all else, just try to remember you're there to engage the audience by relaying sights, sounds, observations, doing it in a compelling way, accurately, fairly, with professionalism. And as one of my bosses at ESPN used to say all the time, just make the audience smarter for having listened to you or for having read what you write. Just try to make the audience smarter, and that will raise the bar for everybody.
We're seeing more and more women as play-by-play announcers now and as color analysts now, especially on men's sports. What is that doing to help raise the profile for women in sports?
Yeah, as much as I'd love to think that, there's always built-in credibility, it takes stuff like that. Yeah. Like, it takes Doris Burke calling games and being the one that is making the audience smarter to further our credibility. Because they're as much as I want to believe that those assumptions are falling away, and they have so much over the last few decades. I mean, I'll do a radio hit, and I don't know if everyone knows, but when you do a radio hit, you can like hear the production on the phone, like before and after they take you off the air. And so do a radio hit, and then as I'm listening in a couple seconds after they say goodbye to me, they're like, wow, she really knows her stuff. And I'm like, yeah, you called me. Yes, thank you.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah. And so like there are always going to be assumptions, and I don't think that person did that maliciously. I think that it is just like so ingrained in a lot of men growing up that like they are the knowledgeable ones about sports, and so it takes a little bit of breaking down. And so I mean, now I'm at the point where I kind of don't care what anyone thinks, and so I'll call that radio producer and be like, hey, don't say that. And so it takes informing people not just about the sports, but about kind of their assumptions.
After you do that, though, do you see those folks growing and learning and actually trying to get better based off what you're teaching them.
Yeah, I don't think that people are offended when you tell them like, hey, this is the way that this came across. I know that like you respect me and you called me, I'm the expert, that's why I'm on your show, but I think that people appreciate it. I know that I appreciate it when people try to make me better. And so it's not like I'm telling them, hi, I hate you. It's like, hey, I want you to be better so that maybe like the next woman that comes along does not feel brushed off by a comment.
I honestly can't say that I have experienced a whole lot of that, or if I did, I blocked it out. But, you know, because most of the stuff that I primarily worked for ESPN, I never worked for any other network or radio outlet or anything. I literally went from doing in-house horse racing coverage at like Laurel Park in Maryland to being on ESPN. So my story is very different. So I would say that just about everybody was pretty respectful, or they just kept it to themselves and talked about it behind my back, who knows?
What do you think the next door that needs to be knocked down is for women in sports?
In sports media?
Sports media.
I mean, I think we already have so many talented women, as you mentioned, doing play-by-play, which I think is fantastic, and more play-by-play for men's sports, not just women's sports. Writers, I think gals like Sarah, I mean, I wouldn't call you a trailblazer because you're a lot younger than me, but you, like I said earlier, the bar keeps getting raised with each generation of competence and excellence and just being a great role model and a great reflection of what a sports journalist should be. And in my mind, it should be, you know, gender neutral. It shouldn't matter if it's a man or a woman writing the story or covering the Jazz or covering, you know, Derek Jeter's rehab start or sitting down with Michael Phelps. And it shouldn't matter. I mean, I think back in the day, it did a lot more. But I think nowadays we're kind of getting past that, I hope. And I think it's great.
Yeah, I think in sports media we've made a ton of strides. I honestly think that in the sports industry at large, the more representation that there is, then that's going to filter out into sports media even more. So when you see more women that are on coaching staffs, that are like in front offices of professional or college ranks, like that's still like a very, very surprising and big deal when you have female coaches on a male staff. And so I just think the more representation that there are in those worlds, that the people who are covering it is going to reflect it more.
Sarah, this might be more for you because you're still in it. But what is it like as a female in sports media trying to navigate the social media world?
Oh, it's gross.
A lot of work, right?
Yeah, it's really weird. I mean, if you are sensitive to bad words, then just like quit now, because you're going to hear it all. I mean, my DMs are just constantly flooded and full of just the grossest, meanest words in the world. And I hate telling people like you've got to have thick skin, because like we shouldn't have to like be called a whore 20 times a day and just like let it roll off our shoulders. Like that's not how it should be. But at some point, like you do have to have a little bit of thick skin, because if that kind of stuff is going to bother you, especially now with social media, it just comes in droves. So, and even I get it if I have like a bad opinion about something, if I have like a bad take, for someone to get mad and be like, you are stupid, and say those sorts of things. But if I'm just like reporting a stat, which is not arguable, and then that is what I receive the vitriol for, it's just incredibly confusing every day.
It's just nastiness, and it's not just directed towards women. I mean, social media really can be a cesspool. It's a great thing, and it's extremely useful, and a lot of us that were or are in sports coverage use Twitter and other platforms to keep apprised of news, because it really is the most timely platform for news. But people can be vicious and nasty because they can be anonymous, or there's no face-to-face repercussions. And that's just a reflection on society today. You know, I don't necessarily think that that's something that only women are faced with and have to deal with. I think it's just a very sad commentary on the state of our society these days. So you do need a thick skin, and I know that's a cliche, but if you can't stand the heat, you got to get out of the kitchen. If you don't like people coming at you on social media with nastiness, because they will, then don't be on there. I mean, that's just the way it is.
I actually wanted to open the floor up for a few questions and see if anybody in the audience had anything for our panelists. We'll start in the back with the teal shirt. I'm going to come on by and bring you the microphone. Hold on one second. Making my way to the back. All right, Dominic, here you go. The microphone is right there for you.
Thank you. Of course. I just want to thank you guys for being here. I may look different, but you know, I'm a blind sports writer, so I feel a lot of what you have to do is the same with me. There's not merely any blind male sports writers out there, so I have to identify more with the women. So I think it's very much the same as disabled as it is with women. But I just have a quick question. Taking you back to your humble roots of horse training, how excited were you when there was finally a first woman horse trainer that won the Belmont Stakes this year?
That was such an amazing moment. I was watching at home. I cried because Belmont Park was my home base when I first started working with racehorses. I was there for like 7 years. And I just know that place so intimately, and I know so many people there. I do not know her. I've never met her. But just the raw, authentic emotion that came flooding over her, I have felt that many times in the sport of horse racing, like with my own racehorses. But to have it be so meaningful and memorable, it was a milestone, and it sort of reminded me of 2015 when American Pharoah won the Triple Crown, and I had been covering the sport of racing since 1995. That was a long time coming, and I retired 3 years after that. But to be able to cover a Triple Crown is one of the things that I will always hold near and dear, that will always mean so much to me professionally.
Hi, Jeannine and Sarah. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us. My name is Caitlin Schmidt. So, as trailblazers, I will call you a trailblazer, Sarah. Stop saying that you're not. In this industry, I was wondering if there was a specific time, like maybe earlier in your careers, that you felt like you finally belonged.
Yeah. I think it happened pretty quickly for me. The first few months that I was covering the Warriors, I feel like I just was running around with my head cut off most of the time. I just felt like everybody knew so much more than me. Everybody did know so much more than me, and they were so much better and more experienced. But there's a little bit of gatekeeping in sports too, where the people who are already there don't trust you until you prove yourself. And so like other reporters kind of wouldn't let me in their circles. I don't think like on purpose, like go sit at that table. No one was saying that to me. But there was one day when I was in the locker room, it was post game, and I had for weeks been trying to ask this player, like get in early after a game, to ask a question first so that I could just like at least get my question out. But I felt like constantly people were like stepping on my toes, and I wasn't fast enough, or I wasn't like getting in. And then one day, I think that like I was just around long enough to where people realized like, okay, she's serious, she's real, she's gonna be sticking around. And then one of the other reporters was like, hey, hang on a second, let Sarah ask the first question. And I was like, oh, I made it, everyone actually likes me. And then like it turned into a running bit where then that player, after every game, he'd be like, all right, how's it going, everyone? Sarah asked me the first question. And so then like it became a thing for many years. And I like really held on to that, and it was really important to me. And I let that reporter know, and I let that player know that those were really important moments to me in my first year, because there was a while where I felt like I didn't belong, or maybe I wasn't going to have what it took. And just having like a little bit of validation from them really, really helped me. It was David Lee, which is like not a great name to beat, but he was very nice to me.
Validation is a strong word, and I have the same feeling. I never really felt like I belonged. Even when I was doing college football and college basketball sideline, I was the sideline reporter for ESPN's ACC basketball coverage, so I had spent a lot of time in this area. But I kept thinking, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I'm just the horse racing girl. You know, do they really take me seriously? I'm just the horse racing girl. And I think it was when ESPN started using me on SportsCenter as a bureau reporter, probably early 2000s, mid 2000s. I was splitting my time, like half of the year I would do SportsCenter reporting, and the other half I would be doing college football, college basketball sideline. And then when they assigned me to like sit down with Michael Phelps or cover Shaquille O'Neal's retirement, that it hit me that like, okay, these people really, I guess they really do think I'm competent, and that felt pretty cool.
I know it's weird, that question, because I think that a lot of people would think that it's like something that we accomplished something that made us feel like we belong, but honestly, it's like the validation that we get from our peers.
Yeah.
That's what makes you feel like you belong.
For sure.
I think we had a question right here in the front.
Much like y'all, I didn't decide very young to get into this. It was sort of a later in life journey. So I dealt with a lot of that imposter syndrome as well. So I empathize with you, and it's a credit to y'all that you've been able to get this far when early on you probably thought, how could I ever get anywhere? There's a negative to it, but also I can imagine that that's very motivating for you, because it makes you work twice as hard as anybody to try and prove you belong. So how have you been able to turn that motivation from being kind of late to the party to now I can be someone who lights up the room anytime I come in as an expert in my field?
Well, yeah, exactly. A lot of reps. I'm a big believer in like trying to turn every negative into a positive, though. And so when I was coming in later, and it was like I was 27, and there's a bunch of like 18 and 19-year-old reporters who are like in their first year also, and I'm like, oh my God, this is horrible. Very quickly, I was like, well, you know what? I have a lot more authority than they do. I'm closer to 30, and so that makes me feel a little bit more powerful. And I'm closer to the age of some of the players or the coaches. And so you just tell yourself whatever you have to believe that you're in the position that you are for a reason.
You know, I think what helped me really hone my skills as a reporter that I was able to use a lot, and it's sad to say this, but unfortunately in horse racing, as I'm sure most of you know, accidents happen. Horses break down, and you're live on the air. And I'll never forget, we were doing a show at Keeneland in Kentucky, and our coordinating producer at ESPN was actually producing the show. He had never produced a horse racing show before. He was leaning on us a lot. Right before we were going to come on the air, like 2 minutes, a horse flips over in the paddock and cracks its head open. And we're covering this live, covering the race live. So I'm telling him in my microphone, I'm like, I'm just letting you know, we're going to have a delay here. There's going to be a problem. I think the accidents and the unpredictability of horse racing made me so quick thinking on my feet, so reactive, so descriptive with what I was hearing and seeing. And also, under difficult circumstances, being able to retain your composure. Those were skills that I had to develop really early on covering horse racing and being part of horse racing as a rider and trainer. That really helped me become, when I think my bosses would agree, that I was pretty much unflappable, no matter what was happening on the field, in the locker room, an accident, a player being airlifted out of the stadium, or any strange, crazy thing that came down the pike, and a lot happens in sports. if you can retain your composure and think on your feet and relay the best information to the audience, that will help you stand out. And I was just fortunate that, unfortunately, I had a lot of experience and practice with that.
I'll also say that just hearing you talk about being on air and dealing with stuff like that made me think about this. Like, you're going to make mistakes, and especially working through an NBA season, it's 82 games, and every day that the games are not happening, there's always something to do, and so it's just nonstop. And so I cannot dwell on something that happened a few days ago, even though I pretty much hate everything that I've ever written. And I'll finish a really long story that I've been working on for a really long time, and I really put my heart into it, and as soon as it comes out, I'm like, oh my God, it's the worst thing I've ever done in my life. And so, but like, you just have to like push it away, because you have to keep moving forward. Like, sports and news are two things that are not going to stop and wait for you. And so whether it's being on air and having to do with something that's live, or whether it's writing about a game or anything that has to do with that, like, on to the next one, just keep moving.
Yeah, exactly. I could not agree with that more. You got to turn the page and keep the focus, man. Sometimes it's hard, but that's key.
Before we wrap things up, I just wanted to get one piece of advice from each of you for everybody in the room on what it really takes to make it.
I mean, it's really important to love it, and I know that I know a lot of journalists that get out of it because they don't, and it's easy to fall out of love with it too. Changing your mind is not an issue. You can do that. You can change your mind a million times. But I think that, as I was saying earlier, the biggest piece of advice that I would give is just be willing to ask for help, because you can't do this alone. Jalen Rose has one of my favorite quotes that I've ever heard. He says, in life, you never get what you deserve, only what you have the leverage to negotiate. And like, you don't get leverage, and you don't get to where you want to be if you're not willing to like try to work for that leverage or get to know people. That's why events like this are so important. Like, ask for help, reach out, give your name and number to people, because like, the worst thing anyone's ever going to tell you is no.
And just to build on that, I would say, just be kind and courteous. That will go a long way with SIDs, with coaches, with your peers, with the cameramen, with the runners, with anybody who you come into contact with, because the people that you meet on your way climbing up the ladder will be the same people that you will come across on your way down. And developing a reputation as somebody who knows her stuff, is professional, has a great ability to communicate accurately and fairly and paint a picture with words, but somebody that people can trust and is nice to be around really goes a long way, because it is a cutthroat business. It is. It's competitive, not just for women, for men too. If you can develop a niche, something that makes you kind of stand out, having fun with your live shots, or I kind of got into the habit of doing that with my college football coverage. We would think of, okay, what could we do that'd be really, really creative and really, our bosses loved it. And so that was kind of my niche, but just developing a way to give and take respect and be somebody that people want to work with.
Thank you very, very much for your time this morning. We really appreciate it. Wonderful panel.